Okay, thank you. Okay, right. Yeah. Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, November 1st, 2022. It is 3:32 p.m. We are starting this public hearing on the proposed Offut Lake Management District number 24. The purpose of this public hearing is to accept and consider objections to the resolution of intention to establish the Offut Lake Management District number 24. Should the board find following public comment and discussion the formation of the LMD is in the public's best interest, a vote of the affected properties may be authorized by the board. This is a hybrid public hearing. Those wishing to testify have joined in person, by Zoom, emailed in comment, or mailed in comment. If you wish to testify, please visit the Thurston County homepage online and select announcements of public hearings on the left-hand side. The information to join this public hearing remotely has been posted there. If you do not wish to testify but would like to listen and follow along, please watch the live stream through the Thurston County YouTube channel to help us manage attendance. Tim Wilson, Water Resource Manager, will provide information on this topic. Assuming those on Zoom wish to testify, I will read your name aloud. I will read the names on the sign-up sheet, and you will have 3 minutes to testify. Time may not be given to another person. When you're called on, please state your name and address for the record. The public hearing is now open. Tim will now present background information of the proposed Offut Lake Management District, written comments submitted, and any additional information requested by the board.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tim Wilson, Water Resources Manager with Public Works. Offut Lake residents previously petitioned for formation of a county-supported lake management district that met the requirements of RCW 3661, which establishes county's authority to establish LMDs and requires that at least 20% of the affected district acreage landowners sign a petition for consideration. The legal process for formation of a proposed LMD includes several major steps, including the passing of a resolution of intention to establish the LMD, a public hearing to hear community objections and comments, authorization of a vote of landowners with affected properties, adoption of an ordinance establishing the LMD, a public hearing regarding the role of rates and charges, and finally, notification by the treasurer to affected owners. The Board of County Commissioners passed a resolution of intention for establishment of the proposed district on September 27, 2022, and also on that date set a public hearing for this date and time. RCW 3661-050 outlines the following purpose and requirements for today's public hearing. 1, the board shall hear objections from any person affected by the formation of the district. 2, representatives of Washington Departments of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Natural Resources, and Department of Ecology shall be afforded opportunities to comment on the proposal. And lastly, members of the public shall be afforded an opportunity to comment on the proposal. Notice of public hearing was advertised in the Olympian on September 29 and October 6, 2022, and posted on the county website. Additionally, copies of the notice of public hearing were mailed to the addresses of all affected property owners, as well as the Washington State Departments of Ecology, Fish and Wildlife, and Natural Resources. RCW 3661 requires the board, prior to passing a resolution of intention, and again, prior to authorizing a community vote, to consider whether the formation of the proposed LMD appears to be both in the public interest to create the LMD and that the financing of the LMD maintenance activities are feasible. The criteria for making the considerations was discussed in detail at a board briefing held on August 17th, 2022. As of 5 p.m. yesterday, 4 written comments were received, which have been forwarded to the clerk of the board for addition to the public record. And I would be happy to read those into the record if those individuals aren't here to provide testimony today.
Thank you. Questions, Commissioner Edwards?
No questions at this point. Thank you.
Questions, Commissioner Menser?
I have a little bit of question about the process. So My understanding of the action the board has taken is really to allow the vote to proceed. Is that
No, you've done that for Pattison Lake,
not for the Offut Lake?
not for Offut Lake. So after this public hearing today, the board would then discuss what you hear today. And then at that point, you have several options, one of which is you put it forward to you authorize us to put that forward to a vote of the Offut community, similar to how you did for Pattison. There are some revisions you can make to the proposal that is before you, and this is per RCW. You may change the boundary of the proposal, although to expand that boundary would require you to take a few steps back and go through another public process. You can alter the plan, which also would include a public process for it, and you must consider comments from the agencies that you hear today.
Those steps that you just described, that's before the vote or after the vote?
That is before the vote.
Okay, so we could adjust the proposal that then goes to the vote. And if it goes to the vote, the board hasn't said we're implementing or approving it. We're approving it to move forward to a public vote of the affected community. And at that point, if they voted in favor, those details that you described would be locked in or would there be any latitude for the board to change it yet again before adoption?
Yeah, as I understand it, that is correct. Your opportunity to change it would be before the vote of the public.
Okay.
Without backing up and going through a public process again.
And so at this point, all we've done as a board is set this public hearing.
Exactly right.
In the wake of this public hearing, we would then discuss setting it for a vote.
That's right.
Okay, got it.
Thank you. I don't have any questions at this point. So we'll go ahead and start the public testimony. We'll start with those who have signed up, and then we will move on to anyone else wishing to provide public testimony, and then we'll move on to people who have shown up via Zoom. First person I have is David Heimer.
Hello, my name is David Heimer. I work for Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm the noxious weed coordinator. And my address is 4516 North 28th Street, Tacoma, Washington, although I'm representing the Offut Lake access site on the lake. I'd like you to know that I participate in several lake management districts, LMDs, in King County as a representative for the Department of Fish and Wildlife and their advisory committees. I enjoy working with the citizens on those committees, and I value the interest and passion they have for their lakes. Similarly, I appreciate Diane Perlman reaching out to the department in June of this year to let us know that the citizens from Offut Lake were in the process of developing a petition to form a lake management district. Unfortunately, we did not engage with that group as fully as we could have at the time to address some of our concerns. As a result, I'm before the Board of County Commissioners testifying regarding those concerns. First, from the records I've reviewed, there does not appear to be an aquatic noxious weed problem, nor a pattern of harmful algal blooms, HABs, at Offut Lake, typically the two factors that drive LMD formation. The main problem appears to be nuisance vegetation, which, although an irritation for humans, is not a problem for fish and wildlife. The department would caution against management plans and activities that remove too much nuisance vegetation and potentially cause HABs. Second, RCW 36-61-160 describes how special assessments may be measured to reflect special benefits, and RCW 35-51-030 describes an alternative or additional methods of assessment. The proposed Offut Lake assessment appear to use flat rates with no supporting documentation to explain how they are calculated. In addition, we find it odd that the department's assessment for Offut is identical to Pattison Lakes, since the data used to calculate the amount should be different. The Department of Fish and Wildlife is supportive of efforts to improve and manage habitat where there is a need. In the case of Offut Lake, the need to manage noxious weeds and HABs appears to be low. With some reservation, we support the formation of the LMD before those problems appear. However, we feel that the assessment used to fund lake management districts should be calculated in a clear and consistent manner based on applicable laws, methodologies, and we are happy to engage in the development and application of that methodology. So that's it.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Sir, could we get a copy of that? Please. Thank you.
If you'll give it to our clerk, and she'll be able to make copies of it. Thank you. Next, I have Daria? It's Darla. Darla? Okay, I apologize.
I didn't know I was going to have to stand up here and talk. Anyway, I'm Darla Gerke, and I live at 4041 116th Avenue Southeast, Olympia, 98501 on Offut Lake. I've lived on the lake for 35 years, and I do not see this weed problem that everybody else sees. I believe if you keep your waterfront clean, you do a little maintenance yourself, it's pretty easy to take care of. Myself and my neighbors who are here that are for this, they do the same thing, and it makes a huge difference. Their waterfront looks great, just like my waterfront looks great because we take care of it. I just really don't believe in putting a bunch of pesticides and garbage in the lake. I have a little 8-month-old grandson that I hope he gets to swim there this summer without pesticides in it or whenever this would start. So, and
I can't hear you.
I'm against this. I've lived there 35 years.
Yes.
I do not see the weed problem.
Can we adjust the, where is Megan here so we can adjust the microphone?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, if you lean in a little bit, it'll help, I think.
Okay, sorry. So I'm just saying, I have lived on the lake for 35 years, and I do not see this weed problem that is being suggested in this study. And I also believe if you have waterfront and you maintain your waterfront, take care of your waterfront, that increases the odds of not having these weeds. Myself and my neighbors who are for this do the same. We do not have the weed problem. I'm sorry if you're down at the other end of the lake where there has always been weeds and always been lily pads, where the beavers, the otters live. That's unfortunate, but I really do not want pesticides in the lake, and I do not want to pay $65 this year or $65 a month. We know this is going to go up every year. That's what happens. So yeah, I'm against it, and thank you.
Thank you. Next, Laura Summers.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for your time. My name is Laura Summers, and I live at 4045 116th Avenue Southeast, Olympia, Washington, 98501. I have come here today to add my voice to those my neighbors in support of allowing the Offut Lake community to move forward with a public vote on whether to form a lake management district. Offut Lake is a diverse community, and the opportunity to work together for the result of improvement of a public resource is a fundamental example of local governance. It is how our democracy works. Offut Lake remains a relatively clean and healthy lake, and it is our desire to prevent the deterioration suffered by other lakes in the area by stepping forward to fund a professional assessment and put in place a lake management district to fund projects before the lake requires extensive restoration. Offut Lake has a very popular public boat launch. It is popular due to its peaceful rural quality and its proximity to the population centers of the county. In recent years, we have seen the boat launch use increase as more people are able to enjoy the lake through the use of personal kayaks and stand-up paddle boards, both of which continue to grow in popularity. The neighbors of Offut Lake are asking only for the opportunity to bring the Lake Management District to a vote of area residents. Please vote today to approve the resolution before you and allow the citizens the opportunity to vote on this important local initiative. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Jerry Baginski. I live at 4443 Waldrick Road Southeast. I've lived there for about 31 years. I'm also the certified operator of our little water system that we have on the north side of the lake. It's fed by a 14-foot deep dug well. Well, I hate to be a fly in the ointment, but I also do not approve of this proposal in its present form. My concern is that, it seems to be asking the wrong question. Rather than asking, how can we get rid of the weeds, we should be asking, how did these weeds get in there to begin with? And how, the weeds got there by, warm, nutrient-rich water. And so the question is, how did these nutrients get into the water to begin with? And over the, we got to remember, this isn't a bathtub, it's a complex ecosystem. So we got to be careful on adding herbicides or anything like that to try to alter the natural state of the lake. In my 31 years, I've seen some things happen that I don't agree with. I've seen a lot of shoreline habitat being pulled out and replaced with turf grass and what have you. I've seen when I first moved there, there'd be a few little fireworks on the lake, but in the last 4 or 5 years, it's like there's a competition to see who can blast the most fireworks into the lake. And, we're talking nitrates, phosphorus, and whatever chemicals are in these fireworks, dropping down into the lake. What else we got? And then the other issue is, of course, people put in lawns, they want them to look nice, so they fertilize them. And here again, we have a problem with nutrients being transferred into the lake. Well, I better get off of that thing. My other issue was the voting and the fees. The voting process, it turns out that the amount of votes you get is proportional to the amount of fees you pay. Which means if you pay $750, you get 750 votes, let's say. And I noticed the Department of Wildlife, they've got 16,200 votes versus my 750, which means their one vote can negate 22 other parcels that have a $750 assessment. So it doesn't seem very democratic process to me, where one entity can negate the will of 22 other entities, living on the lake. So I think that needs to be looked into, and before this thing goes out. All right. Thank you very much.
Next, I have Mark Nelson.
Good afternoon. My name's Mark Nelson. I live at 4338 119th Avenue Southeast. And I'm here to tell you I'm for the lake management. One of the concerns I have is that if with the Lake Management District, we can have control, or somebody will have control and a proper plan to work on the weed problem. Otherwise, as some said, people get their fertilizer in it. There'll be uncontrolled pesticides that because people will do what they need to do to make their beachfront right. And we're way ahead if we have, you know, a controlled plan. I mean, it's in our vested interest to have a good lake. You know, there are a lot of people that use the lake. I mean, I personally lived there more than 50 years ago, and there were no weeds there. As a kid, you know, in, I don't know, 68, 69, my brothers and I, we swam in the lake all the time, and nothing. Now, you know, you got to battle weeds to get out. I mean, I live right next door to where I was living. My parents lived back then. So it is, in the scope of time, it's just going to get worse. I mean, if, you know, I don't know all the details of the science of it right now, but there are a bucket of weeds in it. So I think we need to clean it up, make sure that, and as the gentleman from Fish and Wildlife said, you know, it's being proactive instead of at some point in the future being reactive. Because at some point in time we do nothing, as we all know, sooner or later you gotta really be reactive. So I'd rather be proactive. Thank you.
Next, I have Wilma Hanson.
My name is Wilma Hanson. I live at 12016 Bronson Street Southeast, Tenino, Washington, 98589. I live on the other side of the lake. North side of the lake is the Olympia side. That's the one that the Water District group has gotten started on. The south side of the lake is Bronson Country Beach Club, Bronson Resort. I think we would be the majority of the upland people that would be involved with what is being proposed and promoted. I'm not in favor of this. I've lived there since Bronson Country was first established. That was 1973. Our school, when in the 60s, before I graduated from high school, used to have our summer picnics out at the Offut Lake, the Bronson Offut Lake picnic area. Weeds were not a problem. The Fish and Game used to bring out nets full of trout and seed the lake for fishing because it's an enclosed lake. And that's part of the problem. We have a 5-mile-an-hour speed limit on the lake because it does not have a creek or a river or anything like that that feeds into it. It is a spring-fed lake, and it only has outlets. It does not have any inlets. So you have to be really careful about the type of boats that are on it, the type of motors that are allowed on it. Paddle boards and stuff like that, kayaks, they're great. They don't affect it. But that's one of the reasons why Offut Lake has always had the 5-mile-an-hour speed limit on the lake. We had a guy that bought a house out there that was really upset because he had a float plane and he had planned on coming and going with his plane. That happened once. And I think it was the game warden that gave him the ticket, and that was the end of that. So I'm very much against this. I think that proper care of that lake for the last 60 years, within the last 10, it has deteriorated to the point that we have the big blooms, that we have the big pads that float to the surface, we have the weeds all over. And I don't know what changed in that 10-year period, because my husband and I are both well over 70 and we don't use the lake, but we live there and have planned to die there probably. I don't know what has changed, but something drastically has in the last 10 years to create the situation that we now have. I think that needs to be looked at and addressed before the other. Thank you.
Next, I have Patrick Wazen.
Hello, I'm Patrick Whalen. I live at 4244 119th Avenue Southeast on Offut Lake. I bought this property from my sister-in-law in 2000, and I was living in California, and I spent everything I could put into this to get this property and to keep the house up. And now I come back 2 years ago and I find out that all of this is starting up and they want me to pay even more for my property to settle this out. This is crazy. What are our taxes for? Why is the county saying that they're like taking no responsibility at all for this? So my question still comes down to is there's many, many people that do not live actually on the lake that are not going to have to pay for this. And those of us that live right on the lake, we have to pay, and we have to pay big time. And I don't think that's really fair when you consider that Bronson Beach has a big property there, and they let everybody from any place around the area use that property to bring their boats in and out. And I'm happy to see people using the lake, but for some reason, only the people that have actual property on the lakes, actually on the lake, are being taxed for this. Okay, thank you.
I take it that's a no, just to clarify. Very much a no. Okay, thank you.
Read. Darking.
Dick Darkey? Dick? Oh,
Okay.
by golly, we got it right. You must have went to school in Tenino or something.
Durkin. I live at 4346 119th Avenue Southeast. And I am in favor of the Lake Management Group. I'm a part of the steering committee. My wife and I have bought property in the late 80s, and now we live full-time, but I'd kind of like to compare it to McIntosh. It wasn't too many years ago that lake, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that lake was about in the same condition that we are now. And it has deteriorated so bad that you can't even call it a lake anymore. And it's a swamp. And really, we're going that direction. And if something isn't done, we're going to end up in the same position. Thank you. No on the airport.
Next is Kathy Durkin. Okay. Robert Pogue.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Robert Pogue, 4914 Offut Lake Road, Tenino 98589. Once again, I'm up here just to say, go ahead and pass this on to us and let us have the darn chance to vote on it as a community. The process is what the process is. The committee has worked their butts off getting this thing prepared for our community to be able to sit down, talk about it, and assess the fees on doing something in order to help take care of what the heck's going on in the state's waters. As far as Fish and Wildlife goes, we have some decent contacts there. It'd be nice to have spent some more time with the gentleman that was here today and having communication there. But I hope that we can move this forward to our community. We can work hand in hand with yourselves and Tim in order to draw up a really good plan to help implement making sure this lake doesn't go down the wrong path. We all care enough to be standing here today. A lot of people do as well that can't be here today, but I'm just hoping that you guys give us the chance to move on forward and put it to the vote through our own community. Thank you very much.
Next, I have Rebecca Pogue.
I'm Rebecca Pogue. I live at 4005 120th Avenue South. Better? Little? Okay. I'm Rebecca Pogue. I live at 4005 120th Avenue Southeast, Tenino, of course, at Offut Lake. I'll make this kind of short here. So many people have said so many other really pertinent things. But we've owned the little campground there off at Lake Resort for about 25 years, and I fished the lake for about 20 years before that. So I've seen lots of changes in the water, and I've seen lots of changes with the weeds, and having boats going out pretty much every day that we rent, swimmers, people fishing down there, we see it and live with it. It presents worry for me. Of course, if the weeds get in the props, that's just normally going to happen. We do a lot more rescues of stranded boats out there, both our own boats and other people's boats that get stranded out there. One of my biggest concerns is, I believe it was Temple Lake, and I think even years ago at Deep Lake, if the weeds get going bad enough, and I know there's other kinds of weeds and the lily pads are growing out a bit, I totally support that people can take care of their own lakefronts. I know we do. But I think there's areas where it doesn't really belong to anybody, so nobody is taking care of it. And other lakes have had swimmers go in. I remember one boy that fell off a paddle boat, got caught in the weeds. He was 16. I sat with his sister for a while after he died. Wasn't cool, and I believe it was Tempo or Deep Lake. It's been a while ago. That's been 20, 25 years ago. But the weeds do cause problems and safety issues, especially for the youth. We have a net pen working with Department of Fish and Wildlife. I know they come out and do the dissolved oxygen levels from time to time and kind of keeping an eye on it because that's important. You're putting 10,000 baby trout in. You want them to be healthy. And an Anoxic Lake isn't a very good lake. We've heard Offut Lake often called Thurston County's little gem, and I really believe that. We love our lake. It's a beautiful lake. It's got tons of history. I'd like to see you guys vote that we could at least go to a vote, but I'd also like to see, I've sat and looked at some of the paperwork and the numbers. And that's not my forte, I know. But I'd like more clarity. I'd like to know exactly what the hours are, what the money is going to be this year, next year, coming up years, before we really decide. There's a lot to take into consideration. Is chemical the best way to go? Got some I did tell you I'd make it short. Get me rolling. Thank you.
Next is Diane Perlman.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you so much for listening to all of us today. I've had the pleasure of speaking to you a couple times recently. I live at 4035 116th Avenue Southeast in Olympia on the north side of Offut Lake. And I think I haven't said this yet. I am the fourth generation in the maternal side of my family to live on that property. So to say that the lake is important to me is an understatement. I'm here in support of the LMD, and I'm going to omit some of what I was going to say because I'd like to respond so that public that we haven't had the opportunity to have conversations could hear that our steering committee has literally met weekly for over a year now, 14 months, and we've had discussions on every detail of lake management, not just the process, but really ethically, what can you do to an ecosystem that's so precious and temporary and tentative and evolving. And what we have come to is that we want to move forward so we can have the vegetative management assessment so then we can develop the work plan. And so we have in no way ever said, if we could just be allowed to put chemicals in there, we can clean this up. That's never been our stance. And we've had many discussions where it was exactly the opposite. Let's explore everything. We've just recently connected with a biologist that one of our steering committee brought to one of our meetings. And we were so excited that there's so many alternatives that we don't even know about. But first we need to know what we're dealing with. And so if we can move forward and have the opportunity to have the evaluation and then forge with the community so that it isn't a matter of anybody dumping anything in the lake. We never have had that as a vision. One piece we really do have, though, is for public education so that people can see that what they might do way up on their property affects what happens in the lake because of the heavy rains and runoff that we do get. So I so appreciate you being here and being sort of co-journeyers, and we are excited to move forward, and I appreciate that Tim has walked this through us. It hasn't been easy for anybody because this hadn't even been, the document we were working on was from 2006, and then now it's in the process of being revised. So I really appreciate everybody's patience and ask that you give this your consideration. Thank you.
Next is Kathleen Nolt. Nolt? Nolt?
Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Nolte, and I live at 4647 Waldwick Road, and I'm here to voice my support for the Lake Management District. Since August of 2021, you heard that a small committee has been working to bring forth a petition to form the Lake Management District. This work has been much harder than we anticipated, and it's certainly taken longer than we expected. We remain committed to doing what we can do to bring everybody forward so that we can make a change to this lake. As a group, our committee is interested in exploring all options, not simply adding chemicals. We think that, in fact, is the last resort. We're looking at things like mechanical harvesting, increasing educational opportunities, and improving the water flow, and potentially restoring some of the fish habitat that's missing. We can't do that without a formal organizational structure. We don't believe that the fees alone will fund all of the work that we will eventually need. We will need to apply for grants down the road for some of the work, or we hope to. Coming up with $45,000 to complete the IVAMP, the assessment, is a lot of money for a small lake where we have very few owners around the lake, and we can't charge more than what we're anticipating to charge. I want to address the opportunity that we missed with meeting with Fish and Wildlife. We had hoped to do that in advance of this meeting, and certainly I think that would have been helpful. I want to describe, though, that I completed an assessment of the area boat launches. I looked at lake size, I looked at the size of the boat launches, number of parking spaces, some of those other flavors, and it did look that our lake was comparable to Pattison. And because Pattison had already worked on getting their assessment, we used the same amount for the Fish and Wildlife assessment. So without a standard and consistent process, we did come up with something we have some data to support, but we're looking forward to working through that process as well as much as we need to. Finally, I am hopeful that you will push this forward into the community vote, and we look forward to working with you and your staff to restore the lake. Thank you.
Jim Heineman.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Heineman. I live at 4647 Waldwick Road. I'm here to voice my support for the Offut Lake Management District. I'll keep this short. We moved to Offut Lake about 14 years ago, and we've seen an increasing number of weeds and algae issues in that area. Our family and friends use this as a recreational location, and as we've gone through time, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, swimming, my children and my grandchildren's swimming has been more and more difficult. I live on an area of the lake where the wind sort of blows, so everybody's, a couple people's docks have ended up on my shoreline, everybody who loses a paddleboard, it ends up on my shoreline. Anecdotally, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've had a couple otters, dead otters, up on the shoreline covered in weeds. I don't know if that's the actual reason. It was the weeds are with there, or that's the cause, but that was the result that I had to deal with. So I encourage you to approve the resolution for the LMD. Thank you.
Next is Sally Anderson.
Hi, I'm Sally Anderson, and I have property at 4104 119th Avenue Southeast. It is on the south side of the lake, close to the resort. I've owned that property about 41 years. I used to swim that lake almost every day in the summer. I cannot swim that lake at all. Just to walk out within about 3 feet, there's weeds. If you keep going by boat, it would take another 15 to 20 feet before you could actually get into the water. There's definitely been a change. This is a beautiful lake. It is precious to those of us that live on it. I think the south side might be getting a little bit bigger hit so far with the weeds from what I'm hearing. So I am hoping we can put this to a vote. I feel like it's our responsibility to make sure this lake stays as pristine as it can be. So I'm definitely in favor. And just to put it to a vote for the people to be able to decide, I think is very reasonable. Thank you.
Next, I have Gary Whiteley.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Gary Whitley. I live at 4035 116th Avenue Southeast. I'm the co-chair of the steering committee, and obviously I'm in favor of this petition, and I ask you to allow us to move forward for a public vote to decide this. Offut Lake is a gem. You've heard that from many people, and our opinion is, why wait for it to be a mess before you deal with it? We recognize that you have a difficult job addressing the needs of many constituents and projects. We are also aware that there are many moving parts in this LMD process still in flux, such as the rewritten but not yet shared admin rules, resolution of the county's FTE needs, and the resulting budgetary impacts to our LMD. In spite of those things, we are committed to working cooperatively with you and the county to make this work. We are open to considering all options to promote the balance of nature in our lake so we can solve historical problems caused by nutrient mismanagement and neglect. We are not interfering with the natural balance. We're trying to restore it, right? And we want to ask you to let all stakeholders be part of the solution in order to guarantee a more transparent and successful outcome. As Diane stated, we are not in favor of dumping chemicals into the lake. We actually don't think that's a great idea. But like chemotherapy, sometimes drastic measures are necessary. We won't know what's necessary until we have an IVAMP, the Integrated Aquatic Vegetation Management Plan. That costs between $45,000 and a recent estimate, $55,000. We cannot do that unless we're an LMD. If you let us go to a vote and the voters let us become an LMD, we can qualify for grants for part of that to have a scientific study to decide what it is we are actually going to do. We have made no plans, so anybody that thinks that we're going to just dump chemicals into the lake doesn't understand how much thought and care we put into the process so we can have a plan that makes scientific sense and does not interrupt things. We'd love to talk with Fish and Wildlife. We contacted them, or Diane did in June. We were then told by Public Works that we should not talk with them now because it's Public Works' job to talk with them. So we haven't had a conversation with them, although we would have loved to have had that conversation. We have answered every question we have been asked as a committee. Why are fees what they are? I can explain that in detail. I'll probably run out of time here, but I can explain it in detail to anybody that wants to know. The upland fees we are proposing are the lowest upland fees for any of the 4 LMDs in our community. Lower than Lake Lawrence, Long Lake, and Pattison Lake, we are the lowest. How did we come up with $750, the highest fee for lakefront owners? We had 2 public meetings. We had 100% support in those public meetings. We asked, how should we do this? We presented low, middle, and high options for assessment. And they voted high because that allowed for action sooner. Based on that, we made our decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Barry Halverson.
Good afternoon again, Commissioners. My name is Barry Halverson. I'm a member of the Lake Lawrence Lake Management District. I'm here today to support the application of Offut Lake to become a Lake Management District. I would like to thank you for moving this process forward. As you know, I have been a staunch advocate of the lake management districts and lake and river water quality for years, and believe they are the only way that you, as our county leadership, can have any control over the chemicals that are put in our lakes to treat the nuisance and invasive weeds that are taking over our lakes and are one of the primary causes of increased toxic algae incidents throughout the county. Additionally, LMDs in Thurston County have and will continue to have the responsibility to have an in-depth lake management study, otherwise known as an Integrated Aquatic Vegetative Management Plan, an IVAMP, to determine what needs to be done. An IVAMP will address many or most of everyone's concerns that have been addressed here today, something that your two current LMDs have done for decades. I urge you to approve the Patterson Lake LMD petition to move forward. I thank you for your continued support of the lake management program and for your support as our elected leaders. Thank you very much.
Next, I have Stephen Sheeby.
Hello, I'm Stephen Scheibe, and I live at 4137 116th Avenue, Southeast Olympia. And I am here to present an idea. So I think if I was for some kind of association, it would be a lake association. But here's the idea. Years ago in my study of science at Washington State University, most of you know me as an artist, but I studied environmental science there. I saw this diagram of the lifespan of a lake. And it's the lifespan, not the life cycle. And the lake dies. It fills up with sediment, becomes a marsh, a swamp, a bog, a field, and then a forest. And I thought, that'll never happen to my home lake, which I was there in '67. So I'm back there now. I've lived in Alaska and in Africa, but I'm home again, 55 years. But I'm seeing this change in the last 10 years where the lake is becoming more swamp-like. And there are algal blooms, and there's this Elodia weed that's there. And even the native plants, like there's an Egeria densa. It's a typical weed you'd have in your aquarium. That one's even growing. And when we were kids, we were excited to find it because we put it in our fish tank. And it'd be like one strand a whole summer. And now it's thick under my dad's dock. So something's happening. And I would propose that the lake is too nutrient rich. So that's, I think, a problem of the lake. Second fundamental thing I present, this is just a concept, okay, is that plants are filtering organisms. And so we may have something that's a problem is that these filtering organisms are enjoying all the rich nutrients of the lake, which is part of the biocycle process. But fish pond and aquarium keepers know that the only way to get nitrates out of water is either to do water changes or to run that water through another tank like a terrarium aquarium and run it through the filters of the plant roots with grow lights and then back to their fish tank. That's the only way to get it out. You can't use carbon filters. So I'm thinking now, my brain's connecting the dots. I also observed that there was less algae growing from the bottom, that real thick 1 foot kind. There was less algae growing by the Elodia weed than I've ever seen in the last 10 years. Other years I've been raking it out. Probably 15 years I've been raking it out carefully with a lawn rake. And so it made me think, wait a second, maybe these filtering organisms, these plants are, even though I hate them, they're a total nuisance, maybe they can help us if we can do a removal process, letting them grow, harvesting them out, letting them grow, harvesting them out. And in doing so, every time we take a wheelbarrow load of Elodia out, we are removing a whole bucket of nitrates out of the lake. So this is just a concept idea and maybe Fish and Wildlife, if we could get permission to remove some of the thing that we consider fish cover, but if we could start reversing the dying process of the lake, it might be here for generations to come. So I offer that as a hopeful solution.
Yes or no?
I'm here to offer a solution.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
That's the end of the sign-up sheet. Is there anyone else who showed up in person that would like to provide public testimony? Okay, with that, we will move over to Zoom. And Robin, can you help me out?
Yes, I can. So the first person on the Zoom screen that I will call on is Thomas McRobert.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry. If you would like to carry on conversations, I would ask that it be done outside.
All right. Mr. McRobert, would you like to testify?
Yes, please.
Great, you have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Tom McRobert. I live at 4527 Waldwick Road Southeast, Olympia, Washington, 98501. I moved to Offut Lake 36 years ago. One of the reasons I moved to the lake is the opportunity to be able to do a lot of summer aquatic recreation. In the time that I've lived there, Alodia at first never existed. There was no Alodia whatsoever. Now, as people have pointed out, yes, you can clean your beach up, but we can't. Excuse me. We cannot clean the Alodia up that's in the center of the lake. And in fact, it's all over the lake. When you take a rowboat or a canoe or a paddleboard and you paddle up and down the lake, you will find Alodia all over the lake. That Alodia simply didn't exist 10 years ago. Secondly, people have pointed out the growth of lily pads. Yes, that is true. However, that growth has accelerated greatly. At the east end of the lake, there are two kinds of lily pads. One is native and the other is an invasive species. The invasive species is taking over that end of the lake and in fact is going west, to put it mildly. That lily pad situation is also true at the west end of the lake. So the lily pad growth is not just lily pads naturally growing, but an invasive species that's contesting with the natural lily pad environment and is causing homeowners on both ends of the lake considerable problems. So you have really two things. You have Elodia and you have lily pad growth that is really out of control. The second thing I want to mention is the idea that there are nutrients that are put into the lake. But I would argue that, in fact, since I've lived there, that is no, you have seen an actual diminishment of that. For one thing, in the past, many of the houses did not exactly have what we would call septic systems that would meet the standards of today. And since I've lived there, almost every house on the north end of the lake, for example, has had to put in new septic systems that now conform to the county standards, which is a good thing. And so actually, in some ways, some of the less desirable effluents that are going into the lake no longer exist. So I would urge, as everybody else has mentioned, that we are able to have a vote on this so we can move forward and find out exactly the things we can do to improve the quality of our lake. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ray Prentice.
This is Ray. I'm not testifying. I'm just listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Constance Bain.
I'm just listening.
Thank you very much. Paula Lowe.
Hi, I'm Paula Lowe from Patterson Lake. I wanted to say that I support Offut Lake going through the process of starting an LMD. It's a long, convoluted process to start an LMD. I know because Patterson is going through it right now. I was happy to mentor two of the Offut Lake leaders for the past 2 years to help them navigate the process, the LMD process. They have done the hard work and I hope the residents will support this LMD. Thank you.
Thank you. The last person we have is a phone number 360-970-1114. Do you wish to testify? How would they unmute themselves? here we go.
Yes, I'm just listening.
All right, thank you very much. So that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have received some comments that were written in, so hopefully commissioners have a chance to look at those. Okay, so that will end our public comment period. Commissioners, is there anything that you would like to discuss at this time?
I'd like to ask one question
Go ahead.
of staff. Tim, there was a comment made earlier that we, county said, don't talk to Fish and Game. But why is that there? Did that come from you folks?
Yeah, excuse me. There was a conversation, I believe, post petition, if I remember right, about who should be contacting the agencies to work through the specifics of the proposal. So at that point, the message to the community that was that public works staff should be representing the county. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not going any farther. I was curious about what the
Yes.
deal was. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, so is there, the action would be to move to close the public hearing. Is there a motion?
I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I'll call for the vote.
Aye.
Aye. So this will conclude our public hearing. We will have a follow-up work session on this matter. We're adjourned. It is 4:28 p.m. Thank you.